The NBA season is here. Preseason games are underway. The regular season starts in about 2 weeks. And with the start of a new season, teams have different expectations. Some teams have championship expectations. Some teams have just expectations to make the playoffs and maybe have a potential second round exit. Some teams have some pretty high expectations.
Martell, you mentioned that he believes that this can be the fourth seed in the East. Can you just speak to that?
If you didn't hear what that reporter just said, he said Martell recently said that he expects or thinks the Orlando Magic can be the fourth team in the East. Let's see what Gary Harris has to say about it.
And what the expectations are for this team?
Man, we're confident. We have a confident group. We know the talent we have in here, and it starts tomorrow. And it's not going to be easy by any means, but if we come in and do the stuff we're supposed to do on a daily basis, we don't cut corners. We hold each other accountable. We push each other. We get better each and every day. Look up at the end of the season. That could be a very realistic chance. Nothing's going to be given to us. Nobody's going to expect us. Nobody's going to say that they expect us to be that, so we don't have to go out there and take it.
Very realistic chance it could be. Hey, I'm not here to bash the Orlando Magic, and if that's their expectation, that's their expectation. I'm all for teams and players having supreme confidence in themselves. But honestly, the Magic aren't what we're here to talk about today. I want to talk about a couple of teams that I think if we were at least talking about this mid-offseason, a lot of us would agree that they had either championship aspirations or deep playoff run aspirations. And I want to start out with the Chicago Bulls first. So if you don't know, Chicago Bulls point guard Lonzo Ball had to undergo orthoscopic knee surgery on this past Wednesday, and he's expected to miss at least a few months, according to Shams. Lonzo then had this to say about his injury.
What exactly happens when you try to play basketball, or have you even tried to play basketball?
Yeah, I literally, I really can't run. So can't run or jump. So there's like a range from 30 to 60 degrees when my knee is bent that I have no force and I can't catch myself. So until I can do those things.
Can't run or jump and can't catch yourself? That sounds scary when you really think about it, considering Lonzo's been a world-class athlete his whole life, and now in a position where he literally can't do what he's been able to do his whole life. Is scary when you think about it.
I can't play. So I did rehab. It was getting better, but it was not to a point where I can get out there and actually go out there and run at, full speed or jump. So surgery is the next step.
You mentioned, kind of when you're feeling that discomfort. Are you having everyday pain? Is it something that you're feeling, tweaks in your everyday movement, or is it only when you're trying to get in there and kind of ramp up into those basketball moves?
No, it's every day. Even, going upstairs and stuff, it's still painful. So like I said, it's definitely something I've never dealt with. Even the doctors are a little, surprised about it a little bit, but we're all working together to figure this thing out.
Pain going up and down the stairs is crazy. The first thing that surprised me about the Lonzo situation is why they waited this long to have the surgery, considering now he's going to miss a couple of months. I really don't think we're going to see him till at least the All-Star break. I'm talking February. And the other thing I think should have been a huge red flag for all of us is when the news was announced that the Bulls signed Goran Dragic for a year. Once they signed him, I was like, well, they still have Lonzo, they still have Caruso. Ayo Dosunmu was solid, he's a solid backup. Why are they also signing Dragic? And I think that's because the Bulls knew Lonzo wouldn't be ready. And I get it, you might be thinking, well, Hawk, what's the big deal? They're just going to miss Lonzo. I think this Bulls team is completely different with and without Lonzo on the floor. Outside of his defense, we all know Lonzo, to me at least, has the potential to be an all-NBA level defender. But the other big piece they're going to miss is Lonzo's playmaking. They're a completely different team when he's on the court, especially in the transition game. Lonzo's one of the best transition guards in the league, being able to get that ball up and down the floor with some great full-court passes, or even him dribbling up the floor himself, finding open shooters in the corner, stuff like that. Goran Dragic isn't that type of guard. He's a solid playmaker, but he's more of a half-court guard. He doesn't strike me as a guy who can get out and run in the full court like Lonzo can. Defensively, the Bulls are really going to miss him. I know they're going to have Caruso there, but what Lonzo brings is offense and defense. Caruso is more so a defensive guy. Am I saying the Bulls are going to miss the playoffs? I don't know if I'm ready to take that far of a step yet. Although the East did get a lot better, there are going to be some teams that are going to surprise the Bulls, I think, and the Bulls might end up being a low-seeded 6 seed, might even find themselves in the play-in game in that 7 seed. It's going to be real interesting in Chicago. The reason I'm not counting them out all the way, though, is because they still have DeMar DeRozan, they still have Zach LaVine. They picked up Andre Drummond, which I think is an underrated signing at that backup center position. I know Bulls fans don't love him, but Nikola Vucevic is still a really, really solid center in the NBA. So they have some pieces. I just think they're missing a really, really big chunk with missing Lonzo. Next up, I want to talk about the Phoenix Suns. They go from a team that's in the NBA Finals against the Milwaukee Bucks to a team that gets absolutely embarrassed in Game 7 against the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic. And I think there's a lot of controversy swirling around this team. I think so many people keep telling me on a regular basis that Chris Paul is washed and is over for him. I really don't think he's washed. I do think he had a really bad performance in that Game 7 and in the playoffs in general. At times he did not look good. Speaking of that Game 7 series, let's see what Chris Paul had to say about it.
Chris, when you come off a game like that Game 7, and you get to spend the time with your family and kind of reset your mind a little bit, but was there anything looking back on that series that you kind of learned, or that you, I don't know, maybe regretted or whatever?
Not really, honestly. I haven't thought about it too much. At some point, I'll probably get back to like watching the film, maybe watching it, maybe not. You know what I mean? But I hate to keep saying the same thing over and over. But for me, this summer, it was like putting that time in with my family.
So interesting response from Chris. He says he didn't really learn anything. He says he hadn't thought much about that game. I'll be honest, it doesn't make me feel great if I'm that organization or a fan of that organization and my starting point guard says he hasn't thought much about it. But also to an extent, not to give Chris Paul and the Phoenix Suns an excuse, when I look back at that game, when I went back and rewatched that game, and I'm just look at the box score here, they just didn't make shots. Devin Booker was 3 for 14. Miles Bridges was 3 for 11. Crowder was 2 for 9. Chris Paul shot 50% and didn't have a turnover, but only had 4 assists. But that's because, I mean, your teammates are hitting shots. My point is here, I think it is concerning that he hadn't thought about it much. But at the same time, I do think maybe he really did just need a reset. These guys are human too. When he's like, hey, I just need to be with my family. I need to get away. We'll see how he plays going into this season. Me personally, I don't think he's washed. Something that was concerning to me, though, was what DeAndre Ayton said about him and Monty Williams and if they've talked since Game 7.
How have you and Monty kind of been able to move
I haven't spoken to Monty. No, I haven't spoken to him at all. Ever since the game.
So not even
No.
open that game
I'm here.
You happy to be here, DA?
Yeah, I'm alright. When I'm in between those lines now, I just work. I'm not playing for myself. I have an organization across my chest and a name on my back I have to represent. I'm just here to work.
If you could talk to Monty, what would you want to talk to him about? What would you want to tell him?
Huh?
Well, if you could talk to Monty, what would you want to talk to him about? What would you want to tell him?
I can show him better than I can tell him.
You know what? I'm not mad at this. I actually like that response. When I first heard, I saw some tweets saying, this is my first time actually watching this full clip with you guys, but when I first saw some tweets saying basically just took out the I haven't talked to Monty since Game 7, at first I was like, yikes. But now looking at it and watching it, I think DeAndre Ayton might just really be at a point where it's like, hey, I realized there was some tension between me and the organization. Maybe they don't believe in me. Maybe he thinks that. I don't know what he thinks. He hasn't really said that, but he says he's here. He says he's got a name across his chest and, name on his back, an organization to represent. He's here to clock in, clock out of work and do his job. I think sometimes we want NBA players to like fully love their organization or fully love, or just be all in and just really completely buy in. And I'm not saying he's not bought in. We can't tell that from this, but what we can tell is he's like, I'm taking this job seriously. I can show him better than I could tell him, meaning he realizes he has some things to prove and he wants to go out and show the world what he can do on the basketball court in between the lines. Like he said himself, I'm not mad at this. This is honestly takes what I was going to say to a whole different direction, because I thought just based on the headlines I had been seeing, he didn't necessarily want to be there. Now, I don't know if he does or doesn't want to be in Phoenix. Honestly, he might just be playing his cards close to his chest because let's be real, he can't even be traded till January. That's in his clause in his contract that he just signed. Personally, I think Ayton's a top 10 center in the league. He has the potential to be top 5 for real. And with Chris Paul getting older, with probably his game regressing a little bit more year by year, I think this is a perfect opportunity for DeAndre Ayton to step up even more and prove to this Phoenix Suns organization that he can be here. The reason they're in this video and make my list of teams I'm concerned about because Chris Paul is getting older, because at the end of last season, it looks like the relationship between Monty Williams and DeAndre Ayton was strained a little bit. But if he can come out and prove that he belongs there and proves that he deserves all the minutes he's getting, I'm happy about this organization for the Suns right now. The only other piece I thought was interesting for the Phoenix Suns is the fact that Jay Crowder wants out and they've agreed that he will get traded and they're trying to find a trade for him. I just wish this happened a little bit sooner. I feel like this happening in between, right smack dab in the middle of training camp and as the preseason starts isn't great timing. And I think it's also harder for them to find a trade because now teams are like, well, we have our team, we have our pieces, we want to build with what we have, so we might not be as willing to give up a couple of things for Drake Crowder. And it also begs the question of, well, what is Drake Crowder even worth? If I'm a GM of a team, I'm really not giving anything more than a pick. Like, I don't want to give up players for Drake Crowder. I like the idea of Drake Crowder. I like what he can bring to a team and some of the intangibles he brings. There are games when he might go 5 for 8 from 3, and there's games when he might go 1 for 5 from 3. I'm very curious to see what they trade for him, though. I think the Suns are still going to be a really good team in the Western Conference, though. The West did get better. Some other teams made some moves to get better. You got the Clippers and the Nuggets getting healthy, teams like that. But I think the Suns can still be top 5 in the West, at least. One of the teams I'm also worried about, obviously, the Boston Celtics. We all know about the Ime Udoka situation by now. I don't want to necessarily get into the thick of things or the politics of actually what happened, because to be honest, we don't know that much yet. All I'm going off of is that he's suspended for a year. That's all we really know, concrete facts. And that's one of the biggest concerns from just a basketball perspective. In my mind, Ime is considered one of the better head coaches in the NBA. His coaching was a big part of what changed that organization around in January when they went on that winning streak and started to win games and basically turned their season around. He made some great coaching adjustments in the playoffs, and that's what even got them to the NBA Finals. So I definitely do think they're going to miss him. And the other big piece is missing Robert Williams for probably at least 2 months to start the season. He underwent a procedure on his left knee and is suspected to need at least 4 to 6 weeks to recover. And depending on how that goes, reevaluations, I honestly think it probably could be up to 8 weeks. Especially considering, to my knowledge, that's the same knee he had his meniscus surgery on in March. Williams is huge for that team. Time Lord does so much for their defense. They're going to miss his defensive impact. Add on to the fact that they thought they were adding some front court depth with signing Danilo Gallinari this past offseason, and now he has an ACL injury. He's going to be out for the rest of the year. So for a while, there was a big concern about what that front court is going to look like for the Boston Celtics. Does Al Horford start at center? I mean, he's getting older. How many minutes do you put on his body? Grant Williams, like, you don't have a lot of centers and a lot of big guys in that front court. Then it turns out yesterday, news broke that the Celtics signed Blake Griffin to a 1-year deal. Now, is Blake Griffin the same Blake that he was for the Celtics Tech or even the Detroit Pistons? Definitely, probably not. But he showed some flashes with the Brooklyn Nets last season. He showed he has the ability to step up defensively, mainly because the Nets needed him to just play defense. But there were a lot of times where he was guarding some of the best players on the other team because the Nets just didn't have a go-to defender. And did he shut some guys down? No, but he played some really solid defense and the effort and energy was there. And if he can bring some of that effort and energy to the Boston Celtics, that's what they're going to be looking for. We all know he has the ability to stretch the floor a little bit, especially that mid-range game. If he can get back to that three-point level shooting that he had in Detroit, that'd be great for the Celtics. I think this was a really good signing. It adds some of that front court depth that they are going to miss and need. I think the Celtics are still going to be good, don't get me wrong, but the reason they make this list is because for me, the Celtics were a team that's like, we're trying to go back to the finals and trying to win the finals because they added Danilo Gallinari, they added Malcolm Brogdon, they kept their core pieces together and just made it better. But now, they're missing their head coach. That's a big piece of that core. That's a big core piece that's missing. They're missing Gallinari, someone who they thought was going to be able to do some things for them. They're missing Robert Williams for like probably the first 2 months, a huge piece of that core. So they're probably going to have a rough start. I won't be surprised if the beginning of their season looks very similar to how it did last year, where they didn't look that good to start the season and people were saying trade Jaylen Brown. I don't think it'll go that far because they went to the finals last year. People know what they're capable of, but we probably won't see the real version of the Boston Celtics until sometime after All-Star break. And depending on how good other teams are, that's really going to impact their seeding, and home court advantage, let's be honest, is really important going into the playoffs. I'm really going to keep a close eye on these teams. They're all teams that had really high hopes for going into the playoffs, and I'm really curious to see what happens with them this season. If you made it this far, you're a real one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.